First of all, when I discovered grace in the letter of Romans, studying and preaching every Thursday meeting, started to see that something is different in letter to Romans, and what I was accustomed to preach as a pastor, being a pastor already for almost 15 or even 15 years being a pastor, and reading Romans 1:16, I have noticed that Paul was to explain that he wouldn't ashamed the gospel of Jesus, and then he would go and preach it to Jews and then to Greeks. So why first of all to Jews? Because I discovered that Jews, it was surrounding of Apostle Paul, and for him it was not easy to be under such a pressure of that environment he lived in to preach gospel, because Jews were accustomed to earn salvation, to earn blessings. That's why to preach gospel, and that was first verse, I started to think, why somebody would ashamed to preach gospel and to be ashamed of gospel? Because environment was telling him, you must to do that, to do this, and then you would receive, that you must do your best to receive the best. So it was for me something, wow. But I was preaching that. I was believing as a charismatic pastor to do that. So, and I was living like that a year or 2 years even, preaching on Thursdays and middle week services, teaching from the Romans, and on Sundays normal charismatic preachings. And one day I was watching TBN, and suddenly I have noticed Pastor Joel Osteen was staying on the stage inviting somebody. And what was funny, that I never loved so much Pastor Joel Osteen, because for me he was too sweet, too nice, and maybe too happy. I don't know. Well, I was happy as well in my law, but that guy was too nice. So sunny boy. Although I was in love with in his father. I loved John Osteen so much, and I was one of guys who were helping distribute video VHS of John Osteen's preachings around. A helper of Lakewood Church in our area. I was born in Ukraine, so it was my I was disturbing these videos as well, and listening to these videos in Russian and Ukrainian languages, and then we were doing it in Poland as well. So John Osteen was my favorite pastor, but Joel, I was thinking it was a big mistake. Is not what I would like to see in the ministers of gospel. And so I wasn't happy when I saw Pastor Joel on TV, and suddenly I switch on the TV and I see Pastor Joel with nice smile. He's inviting another sunny boy, and it was Joseph Prince. So I was watching on the screen of TV set and thinking, well, let us see what it will be now. So I was sitting and looking into those both guys. And by the way, previously when I saw Pastor Joseph Prince, for me as well, he was too nice, and And as well, I have a big friend. I had a big friend, a big messianic pastor who is very famous, and in that part of Europe, and he was visiting my church in Poland, and we were sitting one day and watching different channels, Christian channels, and when we saw Pastor Joseph preaching, he was listening, and then he told to me, "Oh, this guy is very dangerous. He is very dangerous," and it was very funny. And for me, it was sometimes ununderstandable when when you are under the law, you cannot hear properly the message. And for me, that kind of message was like too long to get the point. So as I noticed, now I know that charismatics preachings are very short and out of context, like thoughts. You could build thoughts in charismatic preachings right now. From the one verse, you could build big theory, and everybody would be so happy to listen to this theory. So, but for me, Joseph Prince's preaching were too long to get the point. So I couldn't listen so long to that point. So I never listened to the end. So for me, it was like empty preaching about nothing. So, and suddenly I see this Joel inviting another friend of his on the stage, and well, let us watch. And what I have seen, I have seen something incredible, because suddenly Pastor Prince invited another two guys. He called them, they are his pastors, and they were looking like from another kind of boys, very fashionable and very happy, and as they were two of them, and Pastor Joseph said, "Don't worry, they have wives." And I thought to myself, "Oh, it's good. They are not gays." Well, so many thoughts I had in my head, and he asked them that he would show some kind of theater, that one of that guy was supposed to show as if he were a lamb, and another guy was to be a Jew, and Pastor Prince was like a priest. So he explained that a lamb in Old Testament was to be absolutely innocent, absolutely perfect, absolutely nice in all the details. And when this lamb was brought to a priest never asked the sinner about his sins and how many times he sinned and what kind of sins he has sinned, but priest always was searching if a lamb is perfect. So, and then he showed that when sinner gives his sins to the lamb, and lamb receiving sins was dying, was killed, and then this perfection of the lamb was coming to a sinner. And then he said that this is the picture of Jesus, that is Jesus. And when he proclaimed that and showed this story with those two guys, I felt like electricity all over my body, and I remembered my beginning of my faith, of my being born again, because before I became an evangelical pastor and at all evangelical, I was a Catholic a Catholic monk. I was in a monastery, and I was prepared to be a Catholic priest. So when I've heard this, when I've heard for the first time the gospel, I began. I saw Jesus. I felt a presence of Jesus in a very strong way, and I started to serve God out of Catholic Church, because I started to preach Jesus and gospel as it is, and they just kicked me out of the Catholic Church and from the university, Catholic university, where I was prepared to be a priest. So it was the beginning when I had an encounter with Jesus, and later, when I became an evangelical and I became an evangelical pastor, I started to see and to listen a lot of different laws and rules, and I started to be under those laws and rules, and year by year I felt more and more kind of being cursed, that something, freshness of being with God just left me. And it was awful. It was like year by year I was more weaker and unhappy and tired. My wife was tired. My wife didn't want to visit the church anymore. So when and then when I've seen that stage, this picture that Pastor Joseph was showing at Pastor Joel's church, I started to read a book of Destined to Reign, written by Joseph Prince, and in that book I started to see the gospel as it is, and after that I understood that I must preach right now the gospel in my church as it is, because before I was afraid, how should I start? Because I knew already, reading the letter of Romans, that if I should preach the letter of Romans as I see it now, that the church would leave me. And actually, it almost happened when I started to preach grace, and this boldness came to me after the book of Pastor Prince, Destined to Reign. That's why I decided, and I said to myself, if somebody could do it and is not afraid to move in the gospel of grace and is proclaiming so boldly, so why shouldn't me do it the same way? And I have seen that like group by group who are living the church, and I started preaching on every Sunday meeting it was year 13 till the 2017 or even 18, almost 5 years. I saw people were living the church group by group and telling me all the time the same. We were waiting when you would stop preaching grace, but we see you are not going. So that's why we are living. It was awful, but still we are happy that Jesus is close, and I'm happy that Jesus is so powerful, and I'm thankful for ministering of Pastor Joseph. And if anybody is listening now to my testimony about that, I ask you, read the books. Especially the best book to my mind is Destined to Reign. It's probably the best book I've read. And for me it was an incredible revelation. A lot of revelations were there, and I was asking my wife if she would like to read this book as well, and I was waiting what should she tell me. because when I was reading, I was arguing with a lot of points in this book. But when my wife read it, and she's very smart, she's biologist, she finished several universities, so she is absolutely outstanding and smart, much more than me. And when she read it, she said, "Absolutely true. I like it. It's great." I say, "Nothing? Don't you have questions about that book?" She said, "No." Wow. I had a lot of questions. I was reading this book during 2 weeks with the Bible, reading, arguing to myself, checking in the Bible, in Greek Bible, in Hebrew Bible, and because I was studying Bible in Catholic University, my profession was in Catholic University Bible studies, so I knew some Greek, I knew some Hebrew, and I was to check it up. But she said, "Absolutely outstanding book, and we should preach that." And I said, "Okay, I know I should preach, but first of all, I want you to be my helper in that you wouldn't fight me, because you are so smart that if you would start to fight me, I should perish, I should die." And it was the way I started to preach fully gospel of grace, that previously I understood gospel of grace, but the courage to preach gospel of grace came after this ministering of Pastor Joseph. So it's great that there are so great ministers of God in Singapore, and it's good to know that you are not alone, and there are people who are preaching the same gospel that Paul preached. And all the glory to Jesus Christ, who was risen and who gave us his salvation by grace. God bless you. Amen.